And this is a day that for me was a day of significant change in my life for the rest of my life. And it's one that I still remember where I was, and that's when it was clear there was terrorism, and it took, a while to figure out that this was the ugly, ugly Al-Qaeda conspiracy to try to bring down the financial center of the United States and the governmental center of the United States. And I still think often of the passengers on United Flight 93 who knew that the fate of either the White House or the U.S. Capitol building was in their hands, and with unbelievable courage took on the hijackers on that flight. And unfortunately, they perished in a field in Pennsylvania, but they showed the kind of courage that ordinary people somehow have well up in them. And I am forever grateful to them. And I'm grateful to all the men and women of the U.S. military who went to fight for our country following September 11th in Afghanistan, and how ironic that in the midst of all this, we have left Afghanistan. And then later on with Iraq, I mean, the men and women who volunteer to serve in the U.S. military mean so much to me. And I want to say something to you if you're under 30 years of age. This thing that happened 20 years ago and affected older Americans so much is something that's still hard for you to be able to find a place for and process. But you got to understand that that day started a sense of fear and insecurity in the United States that still resides to some extent inside so many of us. And so the key is, what do you do to protect our country or to make our country better? I mean, how do you take a tragic, horrific event like the terrorist attacks that visited our shores on September 11th, 20 years ago, and how do you do something positive with it and out of it? It's where you make our country stronger. And so that's why I'm so grateful to those that step forward and step up. Now, in a small way, I've done some of that over these 20 years, in that I enlisted in my state guard 20 years ago and continue to serve now. I'm likely retiring in January, but I have served for these 20 years, and it's been a great opportunity for me to be able to do something for my state and my country. And I encourage you to do what you can for our great nation. And one thing that I would say to you, one thought I'd leave to you before we get into opposite land, which is Clark Stings. The most important thing, I think, is we need to learn to be kinder to each other again. One thing that troubles me is that we have a tendency these days in the United States to look on others among us with suspicion, where the reality is the enemy is outside the United States. Our fellow Americans we may have disagreements with, but the enemy of our country are people overseas. When we treat each other as enemies instead of opponents or adversaries, but as enemies, we weaken our nation. And one thing we found after September 11, 20 years ago, is the strength that we collectively have. And yes, we were delivered a body blow by Al-Qaeda, but we didn't whimper away. We fought back. And that's the thing, is countries stay strong as long as they're united. We are the United States of America. We need to remember that and get back to that.